program is brought to you by Agnes Scott College. For more information about Agnes Scott College, please visit our website at agnesscott.edu.
Good afternoon. Let's try it one more time. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. It is my great pleasure to welcome you this afternoon on this beautiful day to our annual Founders Day Convocation, this time celebrating the 124th anniversary of the founding of our great college. I want to thank David D'Ambrosio for his beautiful music to start us off. It is great to... It is great to see students, faculty, staff, retired faculty and staff, alumni, parents, special guests, many, many friends of the college who are gathered with us this afternoon. Each year, the college celebrates its founding on a date close to February 22nd, Colonel George Washington Scott's birthday. As an elder of Decatur Presbyterian Church, Colonel Scott was a charter supporter of the church's effort to establish a school for women, the Decatur Female Seminary. He went on to donate funds for the purchase of land and the construction of the school's first building, asking that the school be renamed in honor of his beloved late mother, Agnes Irvine Scott, an Irish immigrant whose tartan I proudly wear today. Since 1918, Agnes Scott has celebrated Founders Day as an opportunity to look back in gratitude on all those who have made today's Agnes Scott possible, from Colonel Scott and the Reverend Frank Gaines to other great leaders, teachers, and benefactors, including the 5 women we will honor today. The vibrant and beautiful living and learning community that is Agnes Scott College today, with students from 43 states and 29 countries, faculty who are leading teacher scholars in a wide array of fields, a devoted and dedicated staff, and a black ring mafia of fiercely loyal and generous alumni from all around the world. All this is made possible by generations of talented and creative people whose vision continues to inspire us today. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the members of the Scott family who are with us today. I see a couple of folks out there. We are so fortunate to have your continued friendship, commitment, and support. And I'd like to ask all those who are either descended from our founder, Colonel George Washington Scott, or related by family, if you would stand, please, so we can recognize you. I see the nobles over there. This year, Founders Day falls just before Sophomore Family Weekend. Tomorrow, we will celebrate another great Agnes Scott tradition, the Sophomore Ring Ceremony, as members of the class of 2015 will receive their Agnes Scott rings. I'd like to take a moment to welcome and recognize the SGA Executive Board, members of the Student Senate, members of our Parents' Council, and parents of sophomores. If you would stand so that we could recognize you. On Sunday, we will welcome prospective members of the class of 2017. You kind of have to wrap your head around that. Whew. And their families. That will be for Scholars Weekend. We're expecting 133 students from 18 states who will visit our campus and interview for our highest academic scholarships. 15 of those students, I'm very happy to say, are Agnes Scott legacies, the daughters, granddaughters, or sisters of alumni or current students. So this weekend makes visible that magical connection of past, present, and future that's at the heart of a great institution of learning like Agnes Scott. We're called to reflect anew on the bold vision of educating and empowering women, of creating a liberal arts institution second to none, which animated our founders. And in so doing, to honor one of the goals of a liberal education, to cultivate an understanding and appreciation of the past. We're also called to be attentive to the development of the wonderful young women who are today's Scotties, and to celebrate their personal and intellectual journey, as we will at tomorrow's sophomore ring ceremony. And as Colonel Scott himself would have wanted, we are called always to continually envision the future and to consider how best to sustain our core mission in the dynamic global society of the 21st century. So welcome. It's now my pleasure to ask the Reverend Kate Calusi Estes, Agnes Scott's Julia Thompson Smith chaplain, to give our invocation. And then following the invocation, the Luchsingers, our student vocal ensemble, will offer a musical rendition of the college's motto from 2 Peter, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge.
We remember that this is the day that we begin and enter into a season of the Christian season of Lent, a time of preparation, study, and discipline. This time each year we are called to remember from where we have come, who we are, and whose we are. If you would join me in prayer. Gracious Creator, as we celebrate this early taste of spring, we're reminded of the upheaval and change that surrounds us. We're thrilled and tempted by gentle spring breezes, and remind us that also that spring is a time of strong winds and mighty storms, ever-changing weather, and we seek the peace and quiet that passes all understanding. There were those among us who saw your hand at work and the light of your spirit in the young women around them. They saw the importance of a place for women to work and learn and study, to live as equals in the world and be engaged in it as all those around them. We thank you today for their foresight and determination. Without their commitment to the education of women, we would not be here today. We celebrate all those who have given of themselves, of their lives and their labors, to nurture this place, to help us to grow and prosper. We give you thanks today and every day for the gifts you have bestowed upon us. And today we celebrate the gifts of some of the strong women who have been both a product of this amazing place, as well as been a part of driving us forward. They saw in us potential both personally and as an institution seeking to live fully into your calling, to think deeply about the world in which we live, to live honorably in that world and engage in the social and intellectual challenges of our times so that we might hear those voices crying out in the wilderness. We ask your blessing on this time and in this place and all those gathered here, that we may all live out your calling to each of us, each and every day. This we pray to your many and beautiful names. Amen.
Thank you, ladies, for that beautiful music. Now, in recognizing our founders, the college has often and deservedly focused on our founding fathers, the remarkable men who formed the founding circle of elders at Decatur Presbyterian Church, as well as the male presidents, trustees, and benefactors who led the college through its first decades. But from the very beginning, from its very first months and years, Decatur Female Seminary had remarkable women, giving it shape, standards, and soul. It was a woman who established student self-government under an honor code, a woman who launched Black Cat, a woman whose extraordinary generosity secured the college's future for the second half of the 20th century, and some towering, brilliant, formidable, and unforgettable women who were many of her most influential teachers, leaders, and mentors, and who over the course of the ensuing decades shaped and reshaped campus culture to preserve the college's core mission while embracing the new realities, challenges, and opportunities of their time. Indeed, it has been women who have so often changed lives on this campus. And so as we prepare to celebrate Agnes Scott's 125th anniversary in 2014, we are dedicating this Founders Day Convocation to a celebration of five of the many remarkable women who have shaped this college. In the coming months and years, we look forward to celebrating other women and men who generation upon generation have built the college that we love today. So today we gather in celebration of five remarkable women who shaped Agnes Scott: the lady principal, the second founder, the standard bearer, the global citizen and guide, and the first to ride in the front of the bus.
The first woman who had a major role in shaping Agnes Scott College was Nannette Hopkins, who was intimately involved with the first 50 years of Agnes Scott's growth and development, from 1889 through 1938. When in 1889, the group from Decatur Presbyterian Church decided to found a school for girls in Decatur, Dr. Frank Gaines went to Virginia to try to get a particular Presbyterian minister that he knew to be the head. The man declined, but advised Dr. Gaines that if I were going to start a school and wanted it to be a great success, I would try to get Miss Nannette Hopkins for its head. Dr. Gaines took the advice and went to see Miss Hopkins. She was, at that time, a 28-year-old prep school graduate teaching in Virginia schools. She was planning to go on to Vassar to get a BA, but Dr. Gaines convinced her to delay that plan and come to Decatur, to the Decatur Female Seminary, which at that time existed only on paper. When the school opened on September 24th, 1889, with 63 pupils of elementary school age, Nannette Hopkins was both principal and teacher, with one assistant teacher, 2 teachers for art and music, and Dr. Gaines as Bible teacher. A few years later, the school, now called Agnes Scott Institute, began adding an upper grade each year and dropping the lowest grade. By this process, the school gradually became a prep school and then an aspiring college. When Agnes Scott Institute became Agnes Scott College in 1906, Nannette Hopkins became Dean of the college. In the first year of the college, she was instrumental in establishing the Student Government Association and the Honor Code. She was also involved in the college's initial accreditation with SACS, the Southern Association of Schools and Colleges, and in obtaining for the college chapters of Phi Beta Kappa and a mortarboard. She served on the Board of Trustees from 1927 to 1938. Hopkins' position as dean combined what are now the separate offices of Dean of the College and Dean of Students. Her multiple duties included pairing roommates, administering social regulations, arranging schedules, supervising faculty, and assigning classrooms. She continued in that combined position until 1938, when she retired due to ill health. One has to wonder whether it was partially exhaustion. But she died in October of that year. At the time of her retirement, the trustees decided to divide her duties into separate functions of Dean of the Faculty and Dean of Students. Hopkins never did go back to get that degree. She was given 2 honorary doctorates in recognition of her accomplishments in education. One, a doctorate in pedagogy from Oglethorpe, the other, a Doctor of Literature from the University of Georgia. President McCain said about her that without any academic degree and never with time for advanced study, merely through the force of her quiet personality and by her keen loyalty to standards and to spiritual values, she became the one whom Agnes Scott people delighted to honor as one of the best educated of all, a truly great woman. Carrie Scandrett, a student during Ms. Hopkins' tenure as dean, then serving under her as assistant dean and succeeding her as dean of students, described Nannette Hopkins as possessed of strength and a gentleness, selflessness and self-control, dignity, poise, charm, graciousness, and a delightful sense of humor. Examples of that sense of humor show up in a 1927 Founders Day radio broadcast to alumni, which she began by saying, "Good evening, girls. This is the oldest landmark at Agnes Scott speaking to you." She was quoted in 1930 telling an anecdote about having electric lights installed in Maine. Said, "We had the lights installed in 1901, and the occasion was so impressive, we entertained the Georgia Senate. I remember one of the professors whispered to me just before the big moment came, 'Watch those old boys when the lights come on.' We did. That was part of the entertainment." She was also described as having the rare gift of listening and the equally rare gift of changing with changing times. In 1929, an award was established in honor of Ms. Hopkins. Called the Hopkins Jewel, it was an amethyst set in white gold for the Agnes Scott colors of purple and white. The Hopkins Jewel was given to the senior who most nearly embodied the ideals of Ms. Hopkins for Agnes Scott. After her death in 1938, a campaign was started to build a permanent memorial. It was interrupted by World War II, but in 1953, Hopkins Hall was built as a permanent memorial to Dean Hopkins. Few people have served Agnes Scott as long or as loyally as Nannette Hopkins. In guiding the school through 50 years, from an elementary school to a prep school to a college, in starting the Student Government Association and the honor system, Nannette Hopkins can truly be said to have shaped Agnes Scott and contributed greatly to the college we know today.
Alumna, trustee, and benefactor Frances Winship Walters epitomized what it means to be a true friend and servant of the college. Her deep and abiding affection for Agnes Scott College and the lifelong friendship she formed while here opened doors to opportunities that notably transformed the college during her day and into the present. Frances Winship Walters was the daughter of Robert Winship of Atlanta. He was president of the Winship Machine Company and later director of the Continental Gin Company, which was the largest manufacturer of cotton gins in the world. She attended Agnes Scott Institute from 1891 to 1894. She was an esteemed member of the college's Board of Trustees from 1937 until her death in 1954, serving as vice chair of the board from 1947 to 1954. And her gifts to the college included the George C. Walters Scholarship, the Frances Winship Walters Foundation at Agnes Scott, the McCain entrance to campus, the Frances Winship Walters Hall, and the Walters Infirmary, and she was also a contributor to Hopkins Hall, along with other donors. Her total giving to Agnes Scott during her lifetime and in her bequest was $4.25 million. In today's dollars, approximately $36 million. Because of her generosity, President McCain was known to refer to Mrs. Walters as the second founder of Agnes Scott College. While her own generous contributions to Agnes Scott place Mrs. Walters among the college's most generous benefactors, the extent of her influence does not stop there. Mrs. Walters forged several lifelong friendships with her Agnes Scott classmates. One of these friendships provided the connection and inspiration for a prominent Atlanta businessman and his wife to become ardent friends and benefactors of the college. While attending Agnes Scott, Frances Winship Walters and Clara Bell Rushton King, along with 5 other Agnes Scott alumni, formed a club called the 7 Mystic Maids. I was looking for a photo, but I haven't found one yet. The women in this group remained friends beyond their years in school and met many times over the course of several decades to celebrate significant occasions in their lives. The bond between Frances and Clara Bell strengthened in 1918 when Clara Bell's daughter, Irene Tift King, married George W. Woodruff, Frances's nephew. The long-standing friendship of Frances and Clara Bell and the deep respect and affection that they demonstrated for Agnes Scott inspired George and Irene Woodruff to become avid philanthropic supporters of the college. George Woodruff served for many years on the college's board of trustees alongside his Aunt Frances. The philanthropic support provided to Agnes Scott by George and his wife had a profound effect on campus and laid the way for the college's relationship with yet another prominent Atlanta philanthropist, George's brother, Robert W. Woodruff. It is not uncommon to hear our alumni count lifelong friends among the many cherished gifts they received from their days as students at Agnes Scott. Through these friendships, Scotties continue to open doors of opportunity for each other and for Agnes Scott College. Frances Winship Walters was a lifelong advocate for Agnes Scott College. Her philanthropy during her lifetime and bequest shaped the campus and many of the programs we have today. In addition, the connections she forged with others who joined her in philanthropic support are as vital today as they were when she was alive. It is in her honor that we recognize members today of the Frances Winship Walters Society, individuals who have designated Agnes Scott as a beneficiary of their estates, thus honoring the vision and the legacy of Frances Winship Walters. From the age of 14, as a student at the Agnes Scott Institute in 1891, she remained involved with the college until her death in 1954, having held a position on the Board of Trustees for the preceding 17 years. She was most accurately described as the second founder of Agnes Scott College. Thank you.
I want to start by saying that now I think I know why alumni give me such funny looks when they hear I am the Ellen Douglass Leyburn Professor of English. First thing they say is, "You don't look nearly as frightening as she does." Okay. But I have to assure you that most of them subsequently comment that their initial fear eventually morphed into a great deal of awe, admiration, and profound appreciation. For Miss Leyburn was the standard bearer, the woman who demanded the best of herself and her students, whose faith in liberal education never faltered, and whose intellectual generosity was unparalleled. A 1943 profile article about this legendary professor remarks, "Almost the first thing you notice is the startling, deep, and resonant tone of her voice. It is a voice not easily forgotten." And it was a voice, apparently, that our students were not always glad to hear calling their names in class. Miss Thomas, Miss Finney, Miss Gaskell. Alums tell me they lowered their eyes so that their teacher's own green-gray eyes would not light on them. You see, Miss Leyburn expected students not only to do the reading, but to have thought about it enough that they were prepared to answer her questions intelligently. And they would know that they had not met that standard when they heard her respond. Do you really mean to say that? Then, rather than moving on to another question or another student, she would simply stand and wait until she heard a more cogent response. One alumnus summarized, "Miss Leyburn willed us to intelligence." Distinguished professor and chair of English for many years, George P. Hayes, remembered a kinder, gentler teacher. And I quote from Professor Hayes, "When her questioning elicited an inarticulate reply, she would rephrase the student's answer so that the student was astonished at her own intelligence." Now, I suspect that Miss Leyburn might have used both methods and many more, all of which worked to inspire her students who, however terrified they were as first years, sought her out as seniors to direct their independent studies, precisely because of her high standards. Among the students whose projects she directed, many have become legends in their own right. People such as the president of the National Shakespeare Association, Jean Addison, distinguished trustee Ann Alprin, poet Mimi Curtis, and C.S. Lewis scholar Dabney Hart, and that's just a few of many, many. One of those students told me her rigor was exciting. Another simply asserted that never again in either of two graduate degree programs would I have a professor with standards as high as hers or who demanded so much from me. But it's important to note that Miss Leyburn asked no more from her students than what she demanded of herself. She graduated from Agnes Scott College as a member of Phi Beta Kappa in 1927. She was the first Agnes Scott graduate to go on to Radcliffe, where her peers and instructors initially looked very skeptically on this, as she put it, Southerner from a Southern college. But this did not deter her. After earning her MA at Radcliffe, she went to Yale for her PhD. And this was at a time when Yale was simply the best place in the world to study 18th century British literature. Now, from that point on, she was a productive and respected scholar, the author of over 40 articles and 2 books. She accomplished all this as she endlessly studied the literature she had taught for decades. And studied was her word. She'd say, I have to go home and study. She never stopped seeing herself as a student. She always knew she had more to learn. She also assigned and graded paper after paper after paper. One former student recalls, our essays were always due on a Friday. On the following Monday, which is just amazing, without fail, the papers were returned, carefully read, marked, and with comments. Now, many alumni remember that those comments were written in a meticulous, tiny script that nonetheless could sting. Miss Thomas, your spelling is atrocious. Miss Curtis, surely you jest. But Miss Leyburn gave much more than the occasional stinger. She discussed every essay with its author individually in her office. Miss Leyburn was also a marshal for academic processions, insisting that students remove their earrings, and she would have a fit over the shoes she would have seen today. I love them. And she also insisted that they wore their mortarboards properly. Her striking voice could often be heard to intone, "Keep them flat, ladies, keep them flat." It wasn't just the angle of the hat Miss Leyburn was after, however, any more than she sought the right answers in her classes. Her passionate discipline was really a disciplined passion that she worked every moment to share. On the first day of class, she wrote on the board a passage from Pascal. Man is but a reed, the most feeble thing in nature, but he is a thinking reed. All our dignity, then, consists of thinking well. The first readings she assigned her first-year students were essays on liberal education. In other words, she let her classes know that it wasn't the austere woman before them who should inspire awe. Rather, it was the opportunity they had while at Agnes Scott to enrich their minds and their lives. Now, this was serious business, but she enjoyed it immensely. Teaching, she said, is a lot of fun. There's another picture that shows that. She also said, it's the fun of sharing with others what you have read and learned. It's the fun of watching an idea catch fire. Miss Leyburn helped young women catch intellectual fire at Agnes Scott from 1934 until she became very ill in 1965. Nonetheless, in the spring of 1966, surrounded by the daffodils she loved, she finished directing 2 independent studies from her home. One of the 2 students writing those papers recalls her last meeting with Miss Leyburn, whose eyes, she said, were closed much of the time. I remember that I stopped reading several times, not sure if she could hear, but she always said something like, "Go on." Professor Hayes said to this same student, "You are a ward against death." Now, those were hard and heavy words for a 21-year-old to take in. But from one perspective, Mr. Hayes was simply affirming that intellectual vitality was the literal essence of Miss Leyburn's life. On May 20th, 1966, just 2 days after she submitted grades for the independent studies, Ellen Douglass Leyburn died. She left to the college her beloved books and the house on South Candler that she herself had designed. But of course, her greatest gift was the intellectual excitement and rigor that she insisted on sharing even with her last breath. No one could have given more. No one is more deserving to be honored on Founders Day as the standard bearer.
I'm going to talk about Ayse Carden. Ayse Carden was a native of Istanbul, Turkey, and she graduated from the American College for Girls. She came to the U.S. to attend Agnes Scott College. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa with a bachelor's degree in psychology in 1966. She went on to Emory University to earn a master's and PhD in educational and developmental psychology. She then returned to her native Turkey, where she served as Dean of Women and Assistant Professor of Psychology at a university in Istanbul. In 1978, she returned to the United States to become part of the faculty at Agnes Scott. She focused her significant expertise and research on societal, professional, and cultural forces that affect women as they pursue their educational and life goals. She received the President's Award for Excellence in Teaching in 1991. While demanding the highest standards of performance from her students, she was always a warm, gentle, and accepting person. During her years at Agnes Scott, she was a strong advocate for international students and for those that wanted to study abroad. She led trips with Professor Harry Wistrand, both to Japan and to her beloved Turkey. She also led alumni and student trips to China. Ayse loved her students, and she loved her life as a professor. When Ayse passed away, I asked for quotes to make a scrapbook for her husband, and I received hundreds and hundreds of quotes. So I pulled out a few of those to read today. So Nancy Lewis from the class of 1999 writes, "Ayse was my professor and advisor while I studied at Agnes Scott. She made an amazing and positive impact on my life by her consistent insistence of simply believing in me, often more than I believed in myself. She also strongly believed in the importance of acknowledging those that make our successes possible in life." Emily Sharp Robinson, class of 1983, writes, "We always knew that Ayse was one of us. From late nights in the Hub to late nights at Tech and Emory, Ayse had walked our walk and talked our talk. I know that all of us appreciated her knowledge of the subject, but more importantly, we all appreciated the knowledge of us and our lives." Anita Barbie, class of 1982. "She was my most important mentor at Agnes Scott. I took social psychology from her and became enthralled with the subject because both of her enthusiastic teaching style, but also her brilliance. She was the person who encouraged me to get a PhD in social psych, and I so wanted to be like her that I followed in her footsteps and went to graduate school for social psychology. She wrote the most instrumental letter on my behalf, and she was the one that celebrated when I got into the University of Georgia." Sherry Nichols Clifton, class of 1983. It's hard to put into words what Dr. Carden meant to me. While I was a psychology major at Agnes Scott, she had a profound effect on my life. She always made me want to do more, to try harder, to push myself to do the best work of which I was capable. But she did this in the most kind and loving manner. Deborah Moore, class of 1991. Ayse believed in me and saw in me things that I could not see about myself. She was both my mentor and friend. I'll never forget one of the most meaningful days of my life. On my 37th birthday, I walked across the stage at Georgia State University and was hooded for my PhD. My own mother, who had been killed in a car accident 2 years before, couldn't be there to witness this important time in my life, but Ayse was there, smiling her wonderful, bright smile and cheering me on. Ayse will always be a part of who I am professionally and personally. I credit her with having a big part in the success of my life. She touched my life in profound ways, and I'm thankful for having her in my life. Carol Sigmund, class of 1988. As a sophomore English major, I took Intro to Psych as a distributional requirement. I had no intention of taking any other psychology classes. I was certainly not going to change my major. I don't remember why I felt this way. I do remember changing my mind in a matter of few classes, or rather, feeling I should change my mind for me. Being in her presence as she treated each young mind with reverence, patiently revealing to us a new way of experiencing the world was a privilege. Her sense of humor was marvelous. She could always entertain a shift in perspective and use it as a learning tool. One could feel her balance and strength of character in the way that she treated everyone. She made us feel loved and capable while holding us to the highest of academic standards. She brought her subject to life. I switched my major that semester and never looked back. Today I'm a licensed professional counselor and I work with at-risk children and teens. I make a difference in the world doing something that I'm good at and something that I enjoy. Ayse showed me how to do this, how to create and live this life that I love. Finally, Ayse impacted faculty and staff as well, so like me. She was the reason that I took the job at Agnes Scott. I instantly liked her and her enthusiasm for the college. She inspired me always to be a better professor. She taught me that the most important part of the job was to cultivate relationships with others. And she spent just as much time connecting with alums as she did her current students. From this, too, I developed the desire to keep connected with alums and enjoy celebrating their achievements. Ayse was always warm and compassionate. She would come by my office every morning to greet me and give me a hug. She called our hall in the Bullock Science Center the Sunshine Hall, and indeed it was a happy place because of her.
In the spirit of the celebrations of the African American Heritage Month, I would like to take you for a ride on an imaginary Agnes Scott College bus. I had come on it in 1989, also the year that the first African American faculty member, Dr. Bernita Berry, came to Agnes Scott. My ride was a lonely one until I met Karen Green, affectionately known as Miss G by students. Unlike many other African American staff members who were riding on the back of the bus, Miss G was on a different ride of her own. It might have been a lonely ride, but it was certainly not a quiet one.
Karen Green was a valued student leader who, upon her graduation in 1986, was hired as one of the first African Americans in a leadership role as a staff member at Agnes Scott College. She served as the Director of Student Activities from 1986 to 1990. Ms. G earned her Master's of Divinity from the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. It was in the mid-1990s when she returned to Agnes Scott that her vision for multicultural engagement would begin to unfold in a variety of strategic ways. She was a thoughtful champion of social justice, an outspoken advocate for the disenfranchised, a compelling voice for the representation of multicultural student, faculty, and staff within the Agnes Scott College community. In the 90s, she also served as an advisor to many wonderful student groups and coordinated multicultural programs on this campus that would shape our campus forever.
Even on that crowded bus, Ms. G's voice stood out. For me, she was, however, that friendly face of a fellow passenger who did not mind my sitting next to her. Our friendship started when I realized that with the exception of Dr. Berry, I was the only other faculty member of color at the college. An alumna, Ms. G had taken Spanish to fulfill her language requirement. Working in the office of the Dean of Students, she had kept close to Professor Eloise Herbert, who was my colleague in the Spanish department. Those two women, Ms. G and Professor Herbert, helped me to navigate the routes that the social Agnes Scott bus would take.
Rosa Parks once stated, "I believe we are all here on the planet Earth to live, grow up, and do what we can to make this world a better place for all people to enjoy freedom."
I was fortunate enough to have sat down next to Ms. G for my initial Agnes Scott ride. Before academia came up with the formal concept of mentoring, Ms. G lovingly did that for me. I still remember venting out in her office as I disclosed to her some of the conversations that other bus riders had addressed to me. In line with a rich African-American social activism in mentoring, from Ms. G, I learned to move away from just venting in private settings. I came to understand that Ms. Rosa Parks and Ms. G's riding on a white bus meant more than just claiming a front seat. Those who have been lucky to have known Ms. G may remember her strong, profound voice. That same voice still rings strong in my memory of her lesson to me on how to project one's voice in a crowded social bus.
We have so many wonderful things to thank her for as a community, including the founding of Joyful Noise and a significant event that will happen this weekend. As an alumna, Karen Green knew the Agnes Scott ring well. She recognized its symbolic power and enshrined it in a special ceremony, which we will celebrate tomorrow night as the sophomore ring ceremony. She was promoted to Assistant Dean of Students in 1997. In 2001, Agnes Scott College reflected on the legacy of Dean Green and determined that a special award should be given annually in her honor.
Ms. G's richest lesson to me and to the Agnes Scott bus riders was to demand that the bus slow down for other non-conventional riders. Ultimately, I learned from her not only that other voices must be heard, but that an effort must be made to accommodate them in the front of a crowded bus.
As Professor Ocasio has so aptly pointed out, and as our award description reads, there are certain people in the life of an institution whose presence is transforming. Ms. G, Dean Karen Green, is one of these people who builds bridges and educates all of us on how to live together in a more fulfilling way. Each year, the President's Committee on Community Diversity honors her legacy by recognizing an individual with the Karen Green Human Relations Award. These individuals or organizations have worked diligently to improve relations among diverse groups on our campus. We are indebted to her for her activism, her support, her love, and her staunch commitment to this beloved college that we all call home. We are proud to honor her among the women that shaped Agnes Scott College.
As a lady principal, I believe strongly in the vision for women's education, and I was proud on that special day that we opened in September of 1889 as a Decatur female seminary. And honored to lead the efforts in creating the outstanding women's college that exists today in Agnes Scott.
Thank you, Nannette Hopkins, for all that you did for students like me that attended the Agnes Scott Institute. In my early years as a student, I recognized the importance of giving your time, talent, and treasures to the place that shaped and influenced my life. This is the reason why I choose to give so much to this special college, where Scotties are born and developed into visionary leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you, Frances Winship Walters, for your philanthropic support. Indeed, it is that legacy that affirms that so many alumni today continue to mark you as the guidepost for giving to this college. For me, it was important that my students understood that not only did they possess the intellectual capacity to excel, my expectation was that they would rise to every standard that I set for them.
Thank you, Ellen Douglass Leyburn. I am proud to have been influenced by your dedication to excellence. You were the spark that lit the fire for so many of us to succeed in education, politics, leadership, and service around the world. As a person whose country of origin was far away from the special sunny place of Decatur, Georgia, it was important for me to advocate for students to also experience the world for women, both within and outside of these walls.
Thank you, Ayse Carden, for your significant efforts to encourage cultural awareness through global engagement. As one of the first African Americans and persons of color to serve Agnes Scott College in a leadership role, my devotion was to students, faculty, and staff of all abilities, beliefs, races, sexualities, and national origins. I wanted them to know that Agnes Scott was a place where human beings could connect, support, and uplift each other in spite of their differences.
Thank you, Karen Green, and thank you, the real Karen Green. Thank you, Karen. You traveled many miles on short notice to be with us today for your strong leadership, your warm and engaging spirit, and your inspiring presence, which helped to launch Agnes Scott on a journey of inclusive excellence. We're proud to claim you as an alumna, as a trailblazing and influential staff leader, and as a shining example of the many remarkable women who shaped Agnes Scott. And so as we close our convocation this afternoon, I'd like to thank our 5 student participants, all graduating seniors, student leaders, and remarkable young women. Destiny Barker, co-president of Latinas Unidas. Aya Gardner, president of Student Senate. Lauren Gaia, president of the Student Government Association. Krista Carter, a scholar in the Dana Leadership Program. And Paige Sullivan, president of Mortarboard National Honor Society. I'd also like to thank all of our wonderful speakers today: Marion Bradley, class of '74, Liz Wilson, professors Peggy Thompson, Jenny Hughes, Rafael Ocasio, and Kijua Sanders McMurtry. Thank you for sharing so beautifully the legacy of these 5 remarkable women. I'd also like to thank Professor David D'Ambrosio, our Luchsingers, and the Reverend Kate Calusi Estes, and many, many thanks to Leanne Hudson, class of '76, and Sarah Hawk from the President's Office, who really made this event possible. And then last, but certainly not least, of course, we wish that all the women we honored today could have been present with us, but we are so thrilled and delighted that Karen Green was here with us today, as well as her sister, Vicki, who traveled from South Carolina to be with us today. Thank you so much for being a part of this celebration. Following the singing of the college hymn, God of the Marching Centuries, I invite all of you to follow our student leaders and their lovely purple and white balloons across the quad in a procession to the Betty Pope Scott Noble, class of '44 Heritage Center on the 2nd floor of McCain Library. There you can enjoy our remarkable collection of Agnes Scott memorabilia and photographs, as well as cheese straws, punch, and coffee. And the coffee, I just want you to know, is in honor of Miss Hopkins, who, according to no less a formidable authority than Dean Scandrett, originated the Agnes Scott tradition of coffee drinking. Thank you all so very much for being with us today. And now, please rise for the singing of the college hymn.